bits. 16 bits!
Yoshi's loose with juicier levels, tastier moves, and dripping with attitude. Yoshi's Story, for the first time on N64.
Ryan, you're gonna get rude.
Shut up, quadruped.
Throughout the 1990s, technology was rapidly accelerating and pushing new boundaries.
What do you get when you combine a kill-or-be-killed perspective of doom with about a dozen futuristic tanks?
We went from the Sega Genesis sliding into the 90s on the heels of its August 1989 release, closing out the decade with the Sega Dreamcast, releasing in September of 1999. Nearly 10 years separated two entire generations of gaming, and in the middle of that time span is where we find our story today, with the North American launch of Sega's first optical media platform, the Sega CD.
Shoot the tubes, dog meat!
There is no Nintendo CD. Understood?
For this video, we're going to focus on the story of the Sega CD launch from the American perspective, observing all North American release dates and nomenclature. If you'd like to have a more globally accurate detail of the launch, please refer to my Mega CD launch video that I posted last year. Before we begin discussing these shiny discs packed with binary data, we have to first consider the landscape of the gaming industry at the time. Predominantly relying on the coin-op and casino gaming business throughout the mid-20th century, Sega began researching the prospect of dabbling in the home console market as a result of arcade traffic dramatically dwindling in the early 80s. Following the success that their strongest competitor Nintendo was having with their October 1985 release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, Sega made their stateside console introduction in September of 1986 with the Sega Master System. This was actually a hardware upgrade of their Eastern Hemisphere exclusive platform, the SG-1000, but majority of gamers in North America probably had no idea that that was even a thing. Although sales were soft for Sega, the Master System could at least boast of much more advanced hardware than the competition. So for a short time, Sega had the most powerful home console on the market. However, since technology never stops, that was a brief period. As the third generation of game consoles was well at its zenith, the next evolution came in October of 1987 with the Japanese release of the NEC PC Engine, the world's first 16-bit home console. This classification was being carried by the video encoders rather than the actual CPU itself, which remained an 8-bit chip. The PC Engine entered the market to be the first legitimate successor to the stranglehold dominance Nintendo had levied for the past 4 years, and with that ushered in the next generation in video game hardware, the fourth generation. The PC Engine in Japan was an immediate success, boasting 500,000 units in sales in its first week on the market alone. It was clear that this is no longer a business experiment, but home console gaming was now an established industry. Not resting on their laurels, Sega was already deep into the development of their fourth generation offering as well. Having a successful arcade division meant that they were already able to develop new technologies and then work on paring them down for home conversions later. 1985 saw the successor of their hugely popular System 1 and 2 boards, the System 16 board. Utilized to deliver the fast pace of vibrant action of Fantasy Zone, Alex Kidd the Lost Stars, and Shinobi. Based around a Motorola 68000 chip, Sega began developing a home unit that would take advantage of most of the same hardware as the arcade unit, allowing for easier home conversions. August 14, 1989 saw the release of the Sega Genesis in North America, launched by two test markets, New York City and Los Angeles. Along with the Genesis launch came 6 titles that received mostly critical acclaim: Altered Beast, Power Up, Last Battle, Space Harrier 2, Super Thunderblade, Thunder Force 2, and Tommy Lasorda Baseball.
Center fielder.
These titles showed off the power and speed of the new 16-bit processors and began to solidify Sega as a powerful competitor in the home gaming industry. In a stroke of genius, Sega had included an expansion card port on every Genesis unit manufactured. In 1989, this seemed mostly overlooked, but a few years later, Sega would find great use for this.
Yes! Awesome! Cool! Totally hot! Way radical, man! Excellent!
Join the DuckTales gang in Disney's DuckTales for Nintendo by Capcom. Also look for Mickey Mousecapade.
In the late 1980s, as the fourth generation was picking up steam, Nintendo was initially fine with continuing their success with the NES. But soon after, they began to lose market share to NEC with their 1989 release of the TurboGrafx and Sega. Their outlook started to change. Having the advantage of holding back, they were able to study the competition and make some responses to the existing hardware and excel in areas where Sega came up short. Launching in August of 1991, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was an instant smash hit. Selling out the entire shipped inventory within hours. Equipped with a graphics chip that could display double the amount of sprites loaded on screen and more colors on screen, it was clear that Sega was now lagging behind when it came to specs on paper. Lines would be drawn in the sand at playgrounds around the globe, and we were all soldiers in a New Age battle. There would be no room for compromise in the right console war of the early 90s. While Sega and Nintendo were investing in an arms race of cartridge-based software, December of 1988 saw NEC leapfrog the entire industry and released the first optical media-based game platform with the PC Engine CD-ROM. This is a world first in gaming, as not even PC games were being released on CDs yet. That would come a year later in 1989 with the Manhole for Macintosh. The PC Engine CD-ROM was notable in that it allowed Redbook audio while in-game. Delivering a first-class multimedia gaming experience. 2 years later, in 1990, NEC would release a CD add-on for the TurboGrafx in North America, simply titled the TurboGrafx CD, and Sega Japan took notice of this technology and immediately started developing a unit that could compete, only initially allowing their American subsidiary access to non-functional dummy units, as the old guard in Japan, not trusting their American counterparts, feared the intellectual property could be discussed to other competitors in America. Revealed to the public at the Tokyo Toy Show in June of 1991, the Sega CD would be the next iteration in Sega's strategy for home consoles. This new peripheral was able to interface together to deliver new experiences through a bevy of new hardware components over compact discs. For the Super NES, Nintendo had 2 years to advance their hardware, so it was a no-brainer to add sprite scaling rotation capabilities. In turn, Sega also made sure to have that in place as well, thanks in part to the Sega CD coming equipped with its own Motorola 68000 processor, this time clocked at nearly twice the speed of the Genesis at 12.5 MHz. Alongside the CPU, the Sega CD is equipped with a custom Sega 315 graphics processor, which allowed for independent sprite scaling and rotation, which not many developers actually took advantage of, unfortunately. The NBA Jam port should have been much closer to the arcade, but Iguana cheaped out and just slapped Redbook audio on the Genesis version and called it a day. Sonic CD, however, did utilize this feature to great lengths, which makes this release a must-own for the platform. The Sega CD was equipped with a Ricoh RF5C164 sound chip that allowed 8 channels of PCM audio. After hearing about the possibility of NEC upping their onboard RAM for the upcoming Super CD add-on, Sega decided on 4 megabits of system RAM in addition to 2 megabits of video RAM, boasting a total of 6 megabits of RAM for the Sega CD. The system also came with a CD-ROM data cache bank of 16 kilobytes, with all this RAM together allowing for preloading of levels, so the disk drive is then relegated to just playing crystal clear digital audio in real time. all this brought together by a CD-ROM drive with a 1x speed access time, which to me seems a technical marvel, as just a year previous Sega of America was literally putting out fires in their offices because pre-production units were exploding. Apparently, Sega of Japan, in all their infinite wisdom, were planning on utilizing music CD drives for the Sega CD. They had not taken into consideration all the random seeking and access times a game would require.
NBA Jam halftime report. Altitude with an attitude.
After being convinced to switch to a much more expensive data disk drives, the console was set and off to manufacturing. The Sega CD launched in the United States on October 15, 1992, with quite a stacked lineup of launch titles, all showing in their own way what the CD technology was capable of delivering for gamers everywhere. From high-speed shooting of sol-feace, to narrative-driven F&V campiness of Night Trap, there was something for everyone to sink their teeth into. But as tradition dictates, we'll go ahead and take a cursory look at each release.
Did you hear about the Jupiter mission? Headquarters still hasn't received a transmission from them, and they're already a week late.
Their transmitter is probably broken down. No big deal. It happens all the time.
For those of you familiar with the channel, you should already know how I feel about Blackhole Assault. Developed by Micronet and localized to the States by BigNet USA, Blackhole Assault is one of the most clunky and clumsy 2D fighters I've ever played. You assume the role of one of two mechas and battle out for universal supremacy against like 10 different various interplanetary beings. The idea seemed fair enough, but the execution I find hard to even categorize as mid. The hitboxes are microscopic, the combat is slow and plodding. This one fight I was only able to win by repeating the same air knee attack over and over, and that's the problem with Blackhole Assault. In order to get anywhere, you have to find the one attack that works and just keep spamming it. The only positive I can say about this is the color and presentation is very nice and vibrant on my triple bypass system, running through a retrotink 5X Pro. And the soundtrack is actually pretty decent as well. Hardly anything to write home about as our first introduction to the platform, but it did show that you can add more to a game by just slapping on some Redbook audio.
Forget the match, Chuck. Ophelia's in trouble. Uh-oh. Chuck's loincloth's still in the wash, and Gary's gone.
Up next we have Chuck Rock, developed by Core Design and published by Sony ImageSoft. This was the first title on what was being set up as a wider universe of characters and settings, followed by Chuck Rock 2, and finally BC Racers, before support for the platform had ended. This is a novel idea for a platformer. You're basically a caveman dude, and your only form of attack is a belly bump. I wasn't aware that you could pick up rocks and such to create elevation. It took me quite a while to figure that out with this puzzle. So there is more depth to this platforming than just running and jumping. Overall, there are 5 areas to run through, and each area has between 4 to 8 levels to complete. Like most other Core Design titles, the soundtrack is stellar, written and composed by the legendary Martin Iveson. The platforming is okay, it just took a while for me to get used to my attack being a belly buster. So I'm not sure if in 2022 I can necessarily recommend checking out Chuck Rock, but I'm sure when we were kids in 1992 it was a fun weekend rental at least. 1992 gave us a true promise and vision of compact disc delivery for video games, FMV, short for full motion video. Our first title to explore this exciting new genre is Cobra Command. Developed by Wolf Team and published by Renovation, Cobra Command is essentially an on-rail shooter where you're in control of an LX-3 Super Cobra helicopter blasting enemies out of the air. Initially released to arcades in 1984 on the Laserdisc format, this is a scaled down and highly compressed port. The original arcade presentation is much cleaner with a larger frame of video. But this would go on to show that the Sega CD, while being harnessed to deliver this new format, was highly incapable of doing it full justice. An extremely limited color palette, extremely limited storage space, and limited video RAM parameters meant that the video started out at 144p. But for those of us who could see the greater vision beyond the limitation, we were given a truly unique gaming experience that none of our friends on Nintendo or Genesis were able to enjoy. When everyone at the lunch table was arguing about graphics, I sat there with a Cheshire Cat grin because I knew Sega CD had them all beat when it came to graphical realism.
Awesome video, huh?
I mean, it's awesome, but it can be more awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Would you trust these guys?
Continuing on our quest for graphical supremacy, we come to the Make My Video series. Developed by Digital Pictures and published by Sega, the series had 4 titles, 2 of which were launch titles with inxs and Marky Mark and a Funky Bunch. As a professional video editor, I can kinda see the novelty in these games, but I can't imagine being 13 years old, mowing lawns for a month, and taking my $60 to buy a copy of Make My Video inxs, and this is the game I have. You're given 3 tracks and you're tasked with editing a music video abiding by the parameters of the person who gives you the assignment. Hence, Make My Video.
What do you say?
Give me a limo and all kind of money from every country in the world. But lose the suits. They cramp my style.
Make my video skate.
I'm not sure if the game takes into account the timing and beat of the cuts, or if it just simply acknowledges the videos that you choose. But these games are both pretty tough for me. I think they would make more sense if I was a director instead of an editor, because it's essentially a broadcast director sim, since the director is the one who takes the video from the feeds. But he has a producer in his ear telling him what to take, so it's mostly a team effort. But in this game, you're playing the role of editor, producer, and director all at once, and it can be very discombobulating.
Megan, this isn't gonna work. You're not scaring me. Wait. What are you doing? No! Leave me alone! No!
Up next is the granddaddy of all controversial games. Developed by Digital Pictures and published by Sega, Night Trap puts you in control of 8 closed-circuit cameras in a house of teenage girls overrun by vampires and marauders. Who would have thought this would lead to congressional hearings and senators demanding better for our kids?
And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system.
Originally shot in 1987, Night Trap was planned to be released on a then new Hasbro console system that relied on VHS tapes as a delivery format. Ultimately, the console was shelved and also Night Trap as well. In 1992, Sega then was able to take the game off of ice and the world was finally able to witness Dana Plato's video game debut. I honestly can't imagine how mind-blowing this game must have been in 1992 when it launched. I didn't witness FMV for the first time until probably sometime in late 93, and that was with Sewer Shark. But I was through the roof with excitement. I'd never seen anything like this before in video games. Again, much like my comment about Cobra Command, it's comical to think of people arguing over what had better graphics on the cartridge consoles, when Night Trap is like, hold my beer, here are true video graphics. Night Trap was later given a remaster in 2017, available on PC, PlayStation, Switch, and Vita, and is by far the best way to experience this title, as at the time of this recording. The next game is a console-packing compilation of some of the most popular Sega titles at the time of release. Developed and published by Sega, Sega Arcade Classics Collection comes packed with Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, Columns, and The Revenge of Shinobi. All 4 games are basically the Genesis titles but on CD, except for Golden Axe, where they converted the FM soundtrack to Redbook audio. I did a comparison, to my ears it's the exact same soundtrack, it's just simply been converted to CD audio is all. I'm guessing that was because on the Genesis cart, when playing Golden Axe, the music drops out for screams. And on Sega CD, since the laser's reading the audio directly, the sound effects can be loaded into RAM for seamless play. Ow! The port to Streets of Rage is exactly as you would expect. All the action, intensity, parallax scrolling, and sound perfection as a Genesis release. Same can be said about Columns as well. I was never really a fan of Tetris or Tetris clones, so I've never really spent much time with Columns either. But this is tit for tat what you would play on the original release on the Genesis. And the same can be said about Revenge of Shinobi. All the amazing FM sound chip music that Yuzo Koshiro brought us all is present and accounted for in the exact same quality. Since this is a Genesis ROM on a compact disc, it behaves and plays exactly as the Genesis release did. All in all, if you got a Sega CD on release date and didn't have money for any additional games, the pack-in titles had you nicely covered.
It's irresponsible of the times to play upon people's superstitions.
Ah, you must be referring to the affair of the mummy's curse.
Has the entire city in an uproar. 3 men dead, and they expect us to believe that a 4,000-year-old mummy was the murderer.
Speaking of pack-in titles, the next game is also packed in with the early Sega CD consoles, developed by ICOM Simulations and published by Sega. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volume 1 is an interesting approach to FMV. At the start, you're given a case detail, and then it's up to you to solve the crime in question. You have several tools at your disposal, a notebook where you're giving a list of the most obvious people or places to start with, a directory which is basically a fast travel ledger that allows you to travel all over London and seek more information, a newspaper which gives you some clues and details of where or who to visit. It's also in physical format as well, and it's much easier to interact with versus the digital version in the game. Holmes Files has some short notes regarding the people and places you have interacted with, and Baker Street Irregulars is pretty much the gossip corner where you can get more tidbits on the goings-ons in London. Once you've conducted a thorough investigation, there is a trial where you can present your evidence to the judge and render verdict. This is an interesting game to say the least, but you do need to be in the right state of mind to approach it, because it can be very tedious and at times boring, so it's not the best title to be playing at 3:30 in the morning after only a 3-hour nap that afternoon, like I was at the time of capturing this footage. But ultimately, just another early example of what FMV could do for gaming, because the multimedia elements in this game definitely gave it a unique feel that could not have been captured on the Genesis or Super Nintendo.
We could be in for a battle with the Star Garrison at 5 locations on our way to Earth.
Take off!
And the final pack-in game in the list is sol-feace, developed by Wolf Team, with Madhouse lending support for animation cutscenes, and published by Sega. sol-feace is a shoot-'em-up in the most classic sense of the genre. Like I've said close to infinity number of times before, I'm not a fan of shooters, or bullet hells, or whatever the heck the genre is. I'm just trash at these games, so I usually don't spend much time on them outside of content for this channel. 7 stages of satanic level of difficulty that I find it hard to believe even the developers themselves were able to complete. The game was so impossible that I was reduced to having to use cheat codes just to get past the first level and make any sort of progression for the recording. Difficulty aside, the level design is very well thought out with beautiful graphics. I did like how things flowed and how the progression worked through the level. Much like all these shooters, there are power-ups, and I felt like this game was very liberal with the power-ups, so that was nice. Since I was dying every 3 seconds, it was a welcome gesture to see a power-up immediately after respawning. The biggest thing I can praise is the amazing soundtrack. Composed by Motoi Sakuraba, the same man who brought us the banging soundtracks for Shining Force 3, as well as the main composer for the music in Granada and Road Avenger, the tracks in sol-feace cannot be slept on. All in all, this is a really good shooter for those who like the genre. This one would have been a no-brainer to own.
Welcome to the sewers, punk. The guy you're replacing, he had that same tough guy smirk on his face that you do, till he hit the wall. They're out there now blotting him up with handy wipes.
The final launch day title is none other than Sewer Shark, developed by Digital Pictures and published by Sony ImageSoft. Like Night Trap, this was also originally shot in 1987, with plans to be used for the Hasbro VHS console. Much to the detractors' dismay, this is actually a pretty decent game from a gameplay perspective. An on-rails shooter where you have to shoot rats, bats, and other vermin from sewer pipes underground. But it's not that simple. At the start of the level, you're given 3 jumps you have to make in succession.
We got some hungry critters bearing 9, 3, 6.
And it's up to you to remember the order of those pipe jumps for when the intersections come up. After all 3 jumps are successfully concluded, you're given 3 more jumps to remember. So between shooting vermin, you also have to be paying attention to the intersections and executing the correct direction and jump, otherwise you'll be radigator meat. In an interesting contrast to most Sega CD games, Sewer Shark was a CD game with FM sound chip audio, so all the music played in the background is provided by the Yamaha YM2612. The gameplay is mostly fun and engaging, so it's hard to get bored if you're into rail shooters. Unfortunately, most gamers would go on to pan Sewer Shark, and in recent years it's now looked at as one of the worst games ever made, thanks in part to James Rolfe and his angry video game nerd character. Unfortunately, many people on the internet didn't understand that that was an act, so people went along with the character's opinions thinking they were gospel. I still say it's a decent game. And that was only the start. Between 1992 and 1995, Sega managed to release 150 titles for the Sega CD platform, in addition to offering 2 official revisions of the hardware, in the Model 2 in 1993, and ultimately followed by the Genesis CDX in 1994, that one which retailing for $400, and adjusted for inflation that would be the equivalent of $800 at the time of this recording. And you thought spending $500 on the PlayStation 5 was expensive today. So there you have it. October 15, 1992 was the dawning of a new era for gamers in America. Sega was asserting their dominance in the home console market by bringing optical media to the masses via a mainstream storage device. To this day, the Sega CD is still my favorite gaming platform, and with the upcoming release of the Sega Genesis Mini 2 next month, it's a perfect opportunity to get reacquainted with some of the more inventive titles that gaming has to offer.